Hey there, How To listeners. Before we get started, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later in the show. It's from our partners at Macy's. For the last 19 years, Macy's has partnered with Reading is Fundamental, the nation's largest children's literacy nonprofit, providing 15 million free books to kids across the country. From July 1st to 31st, you can support Reading is Fundamental by rounding up your Macy's in-store purchases or donating online. So stick around to hear from Ingrid, an elementary school principal, and find out how Reading is Fundamental has impacted the students in her school and greater community.
Just between us.
If you're looking for a new podcast, might I recommend our podcast?
Hi, I'm Gabe Dunn.
And I'm Allison Raskin. We have a weekly show called Just Between Us, where we explore every kind of topic out there.
From mental health to sexuality to animal behavior to science.
We love to interview fascinating people about their various expertise. We also answer listener questions and play a very silly game called Hypotheticals.
You're not going to want to miss it. It's unhinged.
And if you don't want to trust our word for it because it's our show, you should know that the iHeart Podcast Awards nominated us for Best Ensemble for 2023.
That means that we are good at our jobs.
Or we have good chemistry.
Ooh.
So check out Just Between Us every Wednesday.
Dear How To, today I'm writing to you guys because quite frankly I'm lost. I've just came back from a family holiday and it was easily the most stressful week of my year so far. I have an emotional abusive dad and it makes spending time with him very difficult. The problem here is that he's still my dad and I would like to have a relationship with him.
Welcome to How To. I'm Carvell Wallace. Parent-child relationships are so wildly complicated. I mean, even the good ones are full of weird dynamics, subtle jabs, bizarre triggers, and when it's bad, like when it's really combative and rotten, it can be simply overwhelming. So what do? How do you heal from a relationship that, in all honesty, dates back to before you were even born? Well, this is the problem faced by this week's listener, who we're calling Jay.
So my relationship with my dad currently is like non-existent. We have one family group chat that is essentially just my mom and my dad. That's kind of the only communication source I have with my dad.
But it wasn't always that way.
I was really close to my dad growing up. I was a little bit of a tomboy, which I think he really loved. So we used to go like cycling and swimming and all these sort of things together. And then I went to boarding school when I was 11, which I went to a ballet boarding school. So that was predominantly female. And I think through that, I kind of really gained my like femininity and grew up. And he then really struggled to kind of adjust to that.
Jay spent a few years in Canada for school and then moved to the UK where she now lives and works. Her parents remain in Thailand, but once a year, the three of them meet up for family vacation. And this year, let's just say stuff came up.
We booked this tour to go to this garden. Then my dad wanted to go to this restaurant for lunch next door, but by the time it like opened and they were serving us food, we were gonna be late for the tour. And I mentioned like, hey, I think we're gonna be late. And he essentially was like, don't worry about it. Like, I think I can get us in, like, I can talk my way into this garden. And I was like, well, I don't know if we should assume that. It kind of just like really escalated. He then started like essentially just like shouting at me and saying stuff like, you're too British, you're like keeping on time too much, and bringing everything into the fight where it didn't really need to be a fight. And then I cried, like I ran out of the restaurant, and we essentially just didn't speak the whole vacation after that.
First of all, I'm so sorry that happened. I just feel like the kind of pain I experience when I get into a fight with someone I love, it's like the worst kind of psychic pain I know of. Obviously, this fight is not about whether or not you're going to get into this garden. It's about other things. And and so I guess I'm wondering, what do you think is behind this tension?
So this might be like a really long story, but when he grew up, My grandma had this important job in the government and she was traveling loads and she really focused on her career. So my dad was then raised by his grandma, like Southeast Asian old fashioned. And because he didn't receive parental love from a young age, I don't think he knows how to give parental love. Also, like my mom and my dad are in a very difficult situation. They had separated and they're kind of back together, but they're still separated. And it's really awkward and weird. So I think he's like losing a lot of really close people in his life right now, like his wife and then I suppose like his only child. So I think a lot of it is like anger.
You know, a lot of people would say like, well, listen, your dad is toxic. You need to cut him off and you just need to get on with your life. What keeps you from doing that?
Like it really like deeply hurts me to think that I have such a small unit and like I'm going to cut that down. If I can try to have a relationship with my dad, I would like to, because I think, you know, maybe when it's like too late, I'm really going to regret it. I also had this really weird dream where I was like at my dad's funeral and I was talking to his mistress because he cheats on my mum, and I was talking to the person that he's cheating on my mum with, and she was then like explaining everything from my dad's point of view, like saying like, oh, you know, oh, he really wanted someone to like talk to and to love and all this other stuff, and I was like sobbing in my dream. I was like shaking because I was crying so much, and then I woke up and I was like, I've got to try, you know.
Wow. Could you describe what your ideal relationship with your dad would look like?
I think I just want to be able to like talk to him and have a conversation, and maybe like we won't ever be as close as when I was 7, and I'm okay with that. I think I would like to just have a relationship where if something goes wrong, I know I can call him. If something goes right, I know I can call him and celebrate, and I want to just like be there for him, and I want us to just have casual conversations.
Is that even possible? And if so, how do you do it? Here to help Jay figure all this out is Nibarna Kannathasan, a psychotherapist who works across cultures and especially across generational divides.
Also very much interested as a research area as well about what happens when migration happens and different generation acculturate at different spaces. So this is really, really interesting. Also have had personal experiences of figuring that out and still figuring it out.
Nibarna sounds like literally the perfect person to help us. So today on the show, we're going to figure out how to have a healthy relationship with a parental figure, especially if you're currently in a cycle where interactions are painful, but you don't want to cut them off. Stick around.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and Macy's. Hey y'all, what's up? It's your girl, Lene Denis. I'm a writer, creator, and a change maker. And here's a fact that could use some serious changing. Did you know that 25 million children in the U.S. cannot read proficiently? That's what is so exciting about Macy's partnership with Reading is Fundamental, the largest children's literacy nonprofit in the nation. They're on a mission to ensure all children have the ability to read and succeed. It's Ingrid's mission, too.
I'm Dr. Ingrid Bynum, the proud principal of a K-8 school located in Virginia. So when I was growing up, my family was poor, and we could not afford extras such as books. When I was in 4th grade, Reading is Fundamental came to my school to do a book distribution, and RIF gave me the very first book I ever owned. And that book changed the trajectory of my life. It was the start to my love of reading. As a principal, the best part about RIF is that every child in the school receives books, regardless of their circumstances. Macy's has been pivotal in helping RIF provide new books and resources to students who need them the most. One book to change a child's life. When a child becomes a reader, it opens up many doors for opportunity for them to have an amazing future.
Now's the time to inspire a passion for reading among all children. This July, when you round up your purchase at Macy's or donate online, you'll help fund Reading is Fundamental in their efforts to close the youth literacy gap across America. Find out how Macy's is creating brighter futures for all at macys.com/purpose.
Get a new Apple Card account by July 25th and get 10% back on App Store purchases for your first 6 months, up to $100 daily cash. Terms apply. You can earn on games like Candy Crush Saga and Roblox, subscriptions like Apple TV Plus, in-app purchases, and all the good stuff. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone. Subject to credit approval, 10% daily cash earned on up to a maximum of $1,000 in qualifying purchases is valid only for the first 180 days for new Apple Card accounts opened between July 11th and July 25th. To make a qualifying purchase, your new Apple Card must be set as the default payment method for the Apple ID associated with your Apple account in the App Store. You must have a zero balance on all digital Apple accounts associated with your Apple ID. Visit apple.co/App Store for more important offer details. We're back. And, when I heard Jay's story, I started thinking about my own parenting. Like, I have 2 kids right now. They're 18 and 20. But when they were teenagers, I started to realize this thing was happening in my own life where my own childhood wounds would show up in my relationships with them. Like, the ways that I sought love or tried to compensate for feelings of inadequacy would be present when I was parenting. Like, I'd make dinner for my kids, and they'd be like, "Dad, what is this? This sucks." And instead of just being like, okay, well, they didn't like it, I'll make something else, whatever, I would find myself feeling slighted and neglected in the same exact way that I did when I was a kid. It cut deep. It was like they don't recognize my value, like they don't understand what I've done, And it becomes really treacherous territory. I'm not saying I'm exactly like Jay's dad, but what I am saying is that it's worth examining not only our current relationships, but also our past relationships to figure out the root cause of our actions. And that is exactly what Nibarna is here to help us with.
I really like the way that you've spoken about Dad, is how you've thought about his intergenerational way of being loved or being cared about, which I think to me says that you care so much enough to actually write in and to think about how do you do reparative work if it can be done. You've had a different version of Dad, it sounds like, when you were pre-7. There was a close bond, and I'm wondering what it was like for you both when you then went to ballet boarding school and came back. What was that time like?
It was a difficult time. I mean, I loved, my friends. If we cut ballet out, I had a fantastic time. But my parents were also struggling with the absence of me.
What do you think is behind that? Why are these intergenerational relationships so complex, and why are specifically our relationships with our parents so complicated?
Big question, but I think one of the biggest thing is time and space. I think there's a generational different understanding of, let's just use boundaries, because I think it's a buzzword all over the therapy world and all over social media as well. How parents might understand boundaries is completely different to the way that we would have learnt boundaries. And so I think one is how time evolves, and then there's subtle nuances about how we understand what a family narrative should be, or different ways of also being in families that I think in Southeast Asia and from South Asia, there's a collectivist space as well. In most parts of the world, actually, if we're thinking about people of colour, there's this sense of having a collective, it's a family unit, and we do everything is for the well-being of the family. And then I think when we're educated in a Eurocentric or Western way, we're taught individualistic values, and I think they start conflicting and jarring, and you can't. And this is why I think some children then start to code switch and learn how to be in school and their social settings, and then another way at home. But at one point, when children become adults, their relationship with their parents change because they can't code switch anymore. They've fully formed into their identity. And I think depending on parents' emotional capacity, if they're working completely to put food on the table, they're not going to want to sit down and say, tell me about your feelings. And I think when someone is ready to talk about their feelings, it can feel really hard for both parties.
I never really thought of like the cultural difference as being a key factor. But I think now that you pointed out, there is such an emphasis on like older people, the elders, having more respect in the Southeast Asian communities. And also this thing of like when you grow up and you get work, you help your parents out, and that's like the first thing you do.
Yeah, and I think that's quite interesting because then the roles start switching and it gets a bit blurry because who's the adult, who's the child, even if it's an adult child, right?
Yeah.
So here's our first insight. It's probably obvious, but worth noting again that individual relationships are very much affected by community and culture. It can manifest in things like the expectations that people have of their children, the type of respect a person is supposed to receive as an elder, even in a sense of duty. And when people have different community and cultural influences from one another, well, then conflicts are going to arise.
My parents migrated from Sri Lanka to Germany, and then I was born in Germany, and then we moved to the UK. So there was a whole sloshing about that happened. But I think the cultural values are very rooted in sort of South Asian collective thinking and around, I think, survival as well. And I think, Jay, as you were speaking a little bit about the role shifts after a while to sort of provide or to support the family system or even look after the family system happened quite early on. And I think hearing your story as well, Jay, made me think a little about growing up, especially as a teenager. I struggled a little bit with the academic pressure and trying to sort of figure out where do I listen to my parents, and then where am I helping them out with bills or mortgages or trying to translate. And so the boundaries, I guess, were really blurred as I was growing up. And it wasn't until my late 20s that stabilised. There's, at the same time, Jay, as you described your dad and understanding his intergenerational experiences of love and affection, I think very similarly I appreciate my parents' love or affection wasn't said out loud by their parents or their grandparents. They were quite big families. It was more through food. If you had a fight, you knew the fight was over because food was suddenly here and everything's fine, and it's never spoken about.
I mean, we're all people of color who live in kind of non-POC spaces, like just countries. And, you know, I live in America and you guys. And so I think a lot about this, the added kind of identity complexity of, if I am this person, does that mean that I still belong to the family that I came from? And I wonder how you coach people through that who are struggling with these identity issues within a larger cultural context.
I think one of the first things is honoring the people that we're becoming, because there's something around gut instincts and following hopes and dreams that's so important, that's all happened for a reason, and honoring and accepting where we are at. Because I think sometimes that's hard when we don't have family validation to say, well done, go you're doing brilliant, and to be able to do that ourselves and starting there. And I think the other work is the parent work, which I think is the hardest. I think seeing them, as sometimes one of the homeworks I set is to observe parents as strangers. If there are any other adults in the world, just watch them.
Okay, so here's our next insight. As kids, despite being around our parents all the time, we only really get to know them in a very specific and I would say limited context. But then as we grow, our point of view on our parents needs to shift. Just as we don't want to be seen as teenagers forever, they don't want to be seen as my parent forever. Like, we have to learn to put that point of view aside in favor of another way of seeing them. As an adult, as a neighbor, as just a person in the world, a person in your community, someone outside of you. It can help to depersonalize some of this behavior. And you can start small by really just observing how they interact with others. And another thing, even if your relationship with your parent is rocky, especially when it's rocky, it's important to try and get that love and validation that we need from other places.
And I guess this is where the saying, some friends are like family, comes into such huge focus. If they're able to accept you the way that you are, how do you sort of start internalizing that and thinking about yourself in that way? And it is lonely work. I don't think I'm going to shy away from that at all and say that it's easy work, because I think we're all wired to get that validation from caregivers. So when we don't have that, there is that big grieving process and acceptance. And I think, Jay, you raised that really good point. Parents grow older and more fragile. And so then there's that guilt that kicks in of, should I be building a better relationship? Should I be trying harder? And I guess we can't bypass the anger, the grief, everything that comes in with grief as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point.
You know, some people, I know in queer community, we call it chosen family, right? It's this idea that, like, if your parents can't accept who you are and what you've become, then your chosen family becomes really important. They're not just your friends. They're actually people that fill in for that community acceptance that you're not getting from the places that, as Nibarna says, you're wired to get it. And I wonder, Jay, if you feel like you have that.
Yeah, 100%. I'm so, incredibly lucky to have my chosen family in each continent. Like, I had a really tight group of friends when I was in North America, and so lucky now that I live where I live now, and I live with my close friends. I have a big group of people who I feel incredibly supported and just I feel really loved by them. And when I was first asked what your ideal relationship with your dad would be, I was like, I would just want to have a casual conversation with him. But then I think I'm realizing now that what I would love is for him to just say well done. Because getting really emotional, because I feel like I haven't had the easiest journey either. I really struggled with mental health and eating disordered, and I recovered throughout that, and now I feel like I'm actually doing really well, and I really want my dad to recognize that I am doing well and I'm in a better place, and I'm ready to build a relationship with him.
We know what we've been through, especially if you have moved from one cultural space to another. You've done that alone. We all have our stories, or many of us have our stories of ways that we left our family culture to go off and be in another place. And that was not easy. We were isolated. We maybe in some cases were attacked. We were ashamed. We were embarrassed. We struggled with things. And when we come back together with our families in our 20s and 30s, it is really painful that they can't see. I guess what I'm saying is this point of view. Sometimes I think about myself and I'm like, dude, you've survived so much. You're doing such a good job. You're such a badass. And then I go hang out with my family and they're just well, why are you so weird? Why do you do that? How come you do this? That's not how people are supposed to be. And that gap is so painful. And I guess, is there a question there? It's how do you deal with that?
I think stabilizing in ourselves is the most important, because every time we go back into a family environment, we're rehashing that wound. And so it's going to get more and more sore, right? If we just stick a plaster on it and if we look for different vices. That I think, as Jay, you were speaking, it made me think that's one of the core needs of kids, all of us, that validation. And of course, as you were speaking, it made me think that's going to be one of the most painful feelings to come to terms with, of, will my dad ever be proud of me? Will I ever hear it from him? And I hope you do. And I hope you do know that you're doing amazing. How amazing is it that you're able to say, hey, I need a little bit of help with this. Can we all think about it out loud? And if that isn't a testament to how much you want to rebuild a relationship with him, I don't know what is. So I hope you do take that with you. And I think this part is a little bit harder, but is Dad trying? And in his own special way of turning up to these holidays, is that him trying to connect but missing the mark each point when he's trying to say, don't worry, I've got this, I can talk through the security at the garden space? Is that him, in his way, saying, don't worry, I've got you guys? But it doesn't come across that way. And so it's also how are we interpreting, or how is he interpreting you and how are you interpreting him, which it's a lot of emotional labor.
So that is a lot of emotional labor. And it does raise a few questions for me. First of all, does Jay's dad want to repair the relationship too? Or is this just Jay by themselves doing everything? And what should Jay do if the labor is unbalanced? And perhaps, most importantly of all, how can she do this work without getting hurt in the process? All of that after a break.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity, much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these two policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier and could help you save too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, and even hitting the gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
Hi, I'm Willa Paskin, the host of Decoder Ring, Slate's podcast about cracking cultural mysteries. And we're back with a new set of episodes. We're looking at kissing, the romantic, sexy kind that's so ingrained it seems like something people everywhere have always done. But what if they haven't?
Wait, what? What do they do? Do they hug?
We're also going to dive into the mosh pit to find out if alongside the aggressive swirl of flying elbows, there might be some order.
Well, the first rule is, if you don't want to be in the goddamn mosh pit, get the hell out of the way.
And then we're going to sniff around one of Italy's best-known cheeses to ask a real doozy. Where is the most authentic Parmesan in the world being made?
If you want to eat the original Parmigiano like our great-grandparents used to eat it, you have to go to Wisconsin.
You can hear these episodes and more in the new season of Decoder Ring, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Just between us.
If you're looking for a new podcast, might I recommend our podcast?
Hi, I'm Gabe Dunn.
And I'm Allison Raskin. We have a weekly show called Just Between Us, where we explore every kind of topic out there.
From mental health to sexuality to animal behavior to science.
We love to interview fascinating people about their various expertise. We also answer listener questions and play a very silly game called Hypotheticals.
You're not going to want to miss it. It's unhinged.
And if you don't want to trust our word for it because it's our show, you should know that the iHeart Podcast Awards nominated us for Best Ensemble for 2023.
That means that we are good at our jobs.
Or we have good chemistry.
Ooh.
So check out Just Between Us every Wednesday.
We're back with psychologist Nibarna Kannathasan and Jay, who has a strained relationship with her father, but doesn't want to cut him off completely.
Do I now just kind of accept that we have this space and then rebuild this relationship that is like new and just surface level, but I can still have a conversation with him? Or is it like, should I try to reduce the space between me and my dad and explain to him that like these are the ways that I try and I want to know how you've been trying these years so we can, you know, like understand each other's like love language and actually communicate on the same track.
Which felt more breathable, Which felt more lighter?
I think the first one would probably be the easiest, but I think because I still feel that like want of validation, I think that's why I want to go down the second route and say like, this is how I'm trying and this is what I want. How are you trying and what do you want?
That makes sense, and I think that's a fair assessment of the easier route as well. One thing that I might caveat is how important it is for you to be as comfortable as you are in your place. And I'm glad that you said that you feel like you're in a good place. So then every time you open up that conversation with Dad, where you're wanting a deeper connection, that if you walk away, you're still okay. It does need to be planned. And, you know, when are you both the most chilled out? Are you both going cycling together for a little bit? Things that do connect you to sort of almost set up that conversation where you both will have your backs up and to make it as comfortable as possible. And then timing it, we're just going to do it for an hour so that you know you can exit that conversation if it does get heated and it's just the hour or the 30 minutes. And then having your space to come back to and ground and anchor that you are okay. And I would say always look after yourself first, and you can still do the work that way. It doesn't have to be so painful.
So I love this idea of looking after yourself first. And I hear it a lot in recovery spaces, therapy spaces, put on your oxygen mask first before assisting others. But part of the reason that's so difficult with our families, with our parents or our children, is that we feel deeply responsible for them. Like somewhere deep in your system, you feel like looking after yourself first is a form of abandonment of the people who cared for you and sacrificed for you, who were there for you when no one else was. It's sticky stuff. But then I can't help but wonder how much of family fighting is just the outgrowth of people not being able to look after themselves first. Like how much anger and resentment and attachment comes from that. So it's necessary work. And if we've learned anything over and over on this show, it's that nothing productive happens when people are activated and angry. So no matter what's going on, it's probably best to step away from the conversation if you're triggered and revisit it later. Emphasis on the revisiting part.
That example of the restaurant, like when it got really heated, I said, I'm willing to have this conversation with you and I would love to have this conversation with you, but in a private and like more calming space. But then that's the thing, like we never went back to it because I feel like he didn't say, okay, like we'll come back to it. He just kind of kept like going at me. So then we never went back to it.
This raises a question that I've been thinking about this whole time, which is like sometimes we have tools that our parents don't. Or when we're in conflict with someone and we are sort of like doing the right thing, the thing that we have like struggled and learned how to do, how to like calmly say, look, I'm feeling triggered right now and I need space. And we're in conflict with people who have no access to that. They're just like, well, then fuck you. And like, they're just off. And, I think this is an experience we can all relate to. And this is not to say that we're always perfect, but like it raises a question for me about how much empathy / sympathy / understanding are we supposed to be offering to people who are behaving in ways that are in fact toxic. And we can understand that like that toxicity comes from a lack of tools, unaddressed trauma, and all these things. And we can understand that we love people. And yet if one of us has tools and the other doesn't, then I think the fear is that we'll find ourselves always in the situation of like taking the high road, always making space for the other person's messiness. And that becomes an abusive or challenging or difficult dynamic in and of itself. I guess that's the question I'm asking is like, is there such thing as like too much understanding, too much calm, too much like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because at one point we'll self-combust because I think that much giving, it's not conducive to maybe the self-validation or the validation even that we want. That's probably not the kind of relationship that we're looking for with parents. I guess we're going a bit behavioural here, and if we think about little kids, what we model is also then what they learn. And sometimes with parents, I've noticed, especially working with sort of the second generation children who've migrated, setting the tone of saying, if you want access to me and if you want that family sort of unit space, this is how I like to be communicated through.
Yeah, and I think my question would be like, I understand and I'm willing to like learn more and try to understand more about the reasons behind his reactions and his relationship with me, and like make him do the work. And like, to what extent is it just me trying to understand his action, but they're not gonna change his actions?
That's such a fair point, because I think if people don't want to change, we can't change them, essentially.
It's interesting because I'm also thinking about how this feeling we have of wanting to be acknowledged by our parents for what we've done. And it occurs to me that I wonder if our parents feel the same way. Like, one of the things about that fight that you described at the restaurant is that it has to do with like him asserting that he can handle something and then that being doubted and that being a trigger for him. And I wonder if that brought up feelings of like, oh, I can't believe I've accomplished all this in my life. I've raised you, quote unquote. I've been able to earn enough money. I sent you to boarding school. I've done all this stuff. And here you with, you know, your 20 whatever years of life experience are doubting that I can manage a simple task like getting into a garden.
It's so funny, Carvell, because he, like, it's almost like quote unquote, but part of the fight when he was yelling at me was literally said, I fucking brought you up. I fucking sent you to boarding school, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. It was just like quote unquote. Yeah. And I think maybe like what I'm realizing now as well, like that all I've ever wanted was like acknowledgement. And maybe you're right, like maybe all he's ever wanted was acknowledgement as well. And I suppose because he's never really had that conversation with my grandma, you know, like maybe I should say like, you know, like I am proud of you, Dad, for doing all the things that you've managed to like accomplish, because he's accomplished loads in his life and like did really well.
Okay, so maybe that acknowledgement will be an opening for Jay, but still, where does that leave Jay and her dad? Like, they don't have another family trip planned, and if they do have another in-person visit, I think it might be better to meet on Jay's own turf so that she can have more control over how the meetings begin and end. But since they're thousands of miles apart, it might be best to start with some neutral texts or maybe even a phone call just to find some common ground.
He's now kind of like a stranger. How do I start a conversation?
What do you both have in common now?
I don't know what we have in common now. I think we're both very interested in AI and love food. I just feel like it would be me kind of generating a lot of the momentum.
This strikes me as like one of the things people often complain about social media, but one of the interesting things I've observed in a way that it's helped us is that it often gives us like an opportunity to connect with people that we don't have any other way of connecting with them, like by sharing memes or articles or just interesting. Like, I have entire relationships with people that are just about like, oh, here's the Instagram reel I saw about this restaurant. Doesn't this look amazing? And sending it. I mean, dads love information and articles. I think that might be a universal thing. Dads love being like, oh, that's interesting. Like, just there's like anything that makes you say, oh, that's interesting. For some reason, dads love that.
I think that's also like quite a low effort thing. Maybe I can do.
Okay, so here's our next insight. When you're trying to rebuild a relationship, start small. Just connect over things you have in common. It might be sharing memes or movies or songs or just articles that you know you'll both find interesting. It'll give you a neutral thing to talk about. But try to keep it a light lift. It shouldn't really be all on you. So this next question could be a little tricky, but I am thinking about, we have a wide variety of listeners who are in a wide variety of situations, and obviously everyone has parents or had parents in some way, but a lot of people who listen are parents. And I'm wondering if you're a parent and you're listening and maybe you're recognizing some of yourself in Jay's dad. My question is like, what can that listener do to make amends, heal the relationship, etc.?
I think the first thing I'd say is to slow down. If they're noticing that they're having a lot of heated conversations before they go, right, I'm going to fix this, perhaps taking some time to reflect on, as we've done today, a little bit around history. Where's that come from? Is that learnt behaviour from their parents or their grandparents? And are there certain situations or themes that bring up that reaction in them? And I think it's that self-awareness that will probably then, when you do go in to have a conversation, I think we all are a little bit aware of using I statements and saying, I feel this way, but tell me a little bit more about how it makes you feel. And everyone using, well, actually, mum, dad, caregiver, when you do this, it makes me feel suffocated or it makes me feel not good enough. To take it away and maybe not respond straight away, to say, actually, thank you for sharing that, because I imagine it's going to be painful for any parent to hear that they're not doing a good enough job. Or it might be that there's something in the relationship that does need to change. But I think, especially where parents are concerned, slowing it down and taking a little bit of the responsibility makes it a little bit easier, because I think adult children are often looking for their parents for answers and guidance. So there's no harm in slowing down to take time to do that work a little bit more intentionally. I don't know, Jay, if you would add anything to that, or you, Carvell, because I guess we've all experienced this in personal ways, which makes us all experts as well.
What I would appreciate my dad to do is trying to understand me as an adult. I think letting go of like young Jay and like me as a child, and I think just not I mean, you don't need to learn everything about me, but I think trying to have an effort and just like have a conversation with me as you would a friend, just to say, how was your day? How's work going today? I just want to do like a quick shout out to my mum. It's like, I think that's why we've got such a great relationship, because and I think to the parents listening, it's like we've got such a great relationship because she accepted like the changes throughout my life, and she's there as a friend. Now when I tell her that I went out on the weekend and I came back home at 4, she doesn't go, you should have got your 8 hours sleep or anything. She was like, oh, was that fun? Where did you go? Who did you go with? And then she would tell me about like her wine nights with the girls on a Tuesday. And now we have this like really special bond. And I think, just letting go of the fact that they're still your kid, but we can now also be your friend, which is really nice.
This has been for me, this has been such a great conversation. Like, I've really gotten a lot out of this. And I guess I want to ask Jay, was it helpful to you at all?
Extremely helpful. Thank you so much both for just like taking the time to talk to me through this. I think I've tried to understand things from his perspectives. Maybe what he needs from me is to not reject him and to also say I'm proud of him. Maybe that's how I can also like start to build the relationship. And also knowing that like it's okay if I don't build the relationship back, because I also need to have some self-preservation.
Yeah.
It's a habit of nature, Jay. I'm so aware that we went quite deep into your space and what you need for yourself. Bring yourself back, because I think when we go into history and family, it just brings it all back like waves.
Yeah. And I also, one thing I thought of during the podcast that I'm not sure if I said it, but you actually, your story of going away to boarding school really struck me. And I do want to acknowledge that you have accomplished a tremendous amount. And I do want to acknowledge that. And I just want you to hear at least one person say that.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, that means a lot.
Yeah. And that goes for you too. I'm talking about you, our dear listener. I mean, I don't claim to know exactly what you've come through, but I have a pretty strong feeling that you have come through something. And I want to say that even if the people you want to don't recognize it, we do. And we're proud of you. Thanks to Jay for sharing their story with us, and to Nibarna Kannathasan for all of her useful guidance. Do you have a relationship that needs healing? Send us a note at howto@slate.com or leave us a voicemail at 646-495-4001, and we might have you on the show. And if you like what you heard today, please give us a rating and a review and tell a friend. That helps us help more people. How To's executive producer is Derek John. Rosemary Belson, Kevin Bendis, and Jabari Butler produced this episode. Merritt Jacob is senior technical director. Charles Duhigg created the show. And I'm Carvell Wallace. Thanks for listening.
Macy's is committed to creating brighter futures for all. Throughout June, join Macy's in celebrating Pride Month by supporting the Trevor Project, whose mission is to provide life-saving suicide prevention services for LGBTQ young people. Just round up your next in-store purchase or donate online to the Trevor Project. Shop LGBTQ-owned brands and learn more by telling your smart speaker to open Macy's now.
Just between us.
If you're looking for a new podcast, might I recommend our podcast?
Hi, I'm Gabe Dunn.
And I'm Allison Raskin. We have a weekly show called Just Between Us, where we explore every kind of topic out there.
From mental health to sexuality to animal behavior to science.
We love to interview fascinating people about their various expertise. We also answer listener questions and play a very silly game called Hypotheticals.
You're not going to want to miss it. It's unhinged.
And if you don't want to trust our word for it because it's our show, you should know that the iHeart Podcast Awards nominated us for Best Ensemble for 2023.
That means that we are good at our jobs.
Or we have good chemistry.
Ooh.
So check out Just Between Us every Wednesday.